Today we're going to be painting this Punisher bust. This model is from Fortis Mint, and you can get it through his Patreon, and I will put a link to it in the description, as well as everything that we're going to be using in this video today. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing is I took it over to my spray booth and started airbrushing this. I'm just using a black paint primer, and I'm really just focusing on the body. I'm not touching the head because I'm going to actually do another primer on the head itself. And this bust just has a simple like pedestal that I also wanted to paint black primer to give myself a good base. So once I actually had the body done, I started using some masking tape and masked off the neck. Then the other thing is putting some saran wrap around it, then using blue painter's tape, and that way I am not worrying about overspray on what I've already painted. And what I'm using is the Vallejo airbrush primer. Once it was all primed, I went ahead and moved forward with the skin, and for the first coat of the skin, I'm using Dark Flesh model color paint brand from Vallejo, and it does look super orange, but this is actually the base coat. So then after that, I moved forward and went with a basic skin tone that you can see here. And this is just a lighter version on top of the darker tone. So I just keep going a little bit on top of each coat. And I'm not like overdoing it because I want that other color to show through. Then the last step is you can see I'm shooting it from above with the light flesh. And this allowed me to have kind of a light source to where the top of his brow is lighter, his nose is lighter, and then you can see the sockets are actually a little bit darker. So you can see that this is what it looks like when it came out of the spray booth. It just looks beautiful. This is a great model. I printed this actually at a 0.08 millimeter layer height, so there is a lot of detail in this. It's the layer lines, you almost can't see them at all. So to get started, I'm starting with nutmeg apple barrel paint, and this is just a regular acrylic paint, and I go forward and I'm moving through the straps, and I watered down my paint and started with just covering the straps as much as I can. I don't really care too much about getting it on the edges or on the black at all. I'm trying to stay as neat as I can, but not being afraid to get it on the black because I'm going to go back over it. So I know that my layers and how I'm doing it, it doesn't matter. Especially that the black covers up really easily. But this took me multiple coats because of these more cost-effective hobby craft paints. There's less pigment in them, so it definitely takes more coats than if you go with like the Vallejo or Army Painter paints. So as soon as I'm done with the straps, I'm just taking a straight white, and this is an apple barrel as well. And I put a little bit of water in it and just cover it. And as soon as it's dry, I'm ready for my ink wash, and it's my DIY ink wash. And I'm covering the whole thing and also the straps because I just want it to have that grunge kind of look because I'm really going to be weathering the chest, and I don't want it to look great, but I want it to look white. So it got a little too dark, so I went ahead and did a dry brush with that white over top of it. And then this is me just starting with the eyes, and what I'm doing is I'm getting the entire eyeball black, and later on you'll see why I'm doing this, but essentially it creates edge lines for your eyes when you paint them in. And when it came to doing the hair, I didn't want to really go with a straight black, even though he does have black hair. So I went with a wrought iron, and this is Folk Art's wrought iron, and it's got this nice, you know, dark gray, but it's kind of like a silvery tone to it. When it comes to hairlines, I almost always edge them first, because I'm always worried about not using a good enough brush, and then if I'm like slathering it on, I mess up the edges, and I don't want to touch the skin because I did all that work and then it's all ruined. So I take a lot of time working on the edges of the hair with a nice pointed brush, and once I have that, then I go in like this and with a bigger brush and paint the whole hair, and that way I'm not too worried about, you know, getting it everywhere on his face because I'm not going near the edges of the paint and the skin. So I'm moving forward with the face, and I'm using these two quick shades, and they're basically just washes. I started with the mouth first, and this is just a red wash, and what I did was I just took a drop and then took 3 or 4 drops of water and watered it down to make it more of a pink, and that got his lips pretty good. And then when it came to his face, I just used a skin tone wash, and with the same thing, I watered it down and just used it sparingly because I liked the tone I already painted. So the next thing after that is I used this raw sienna from Folk Art, and I go over this with that nutmeg color, and I find it just makes a really good leather texture and the color. So I just dry brush right over top of it. There's some areas that I find that I go a little more rough with this dry brush, just to like bring out some of like the wornness of like some leather. So when I was done with that, I started dry brushing the actual black suit, and what I did here was take a black and just add a few drops of white in there and started to really bring out some of the suit itself. So I did mess up a little bit and hit the skull, so I had to dry brush a little back over top of the white parts. So for the parts that I'm using metal on there for like the butterfly knife and some of the clasps and hooks, I am using a brushed metal, and it's from Folk Art. And I really like it because it lays down really good, and you don't have to water it down or anything like that because it's pretty thin, but the coverage on it is amazing. But once I'm done with that, I move on to some of the buttons that are on the straps, and I'm using Folk Art's brushed metal, and it is actually the brushed black is what I'm using for that. So it's just basically, it's a little gloss with some metallic in it, and I really like this when I'm not trying to bring a lot of attention to things, but want some of those metal looks. So now is the time for all the little tiny details. So there's stitching in this, and I'm actually going through and putting a little tiny blob of paint on every single stitch here. It took me quite some time, and I really wish I went this fast while doing it. And this is the stuff that really makes a paint. These little tiny details like this. I know it took me forever, but it's one of those things you notice instantly that every single stitch is painted. So now I'm going to go into the eyes, the whites of the eyes, and paint those. And I'm actually leaving a little tiny edge of black in the eyes themselves, so it's almost like eyeliner. And it just brings out the eyes even more than just putting white right up to them. And then I put some blue for the irises and a few little tiny dots on the pupils. Then one of the last things I had left was painting his collar where I had it masked. And I'm just using a medium gray from Folk Art, and I'm just going through and painting it there. And right when I thought I was done, I was looking over it and noticed his hair really did need a second coat of that wrought iron from Folk Art. So I went ahead and just did a quick second coat just to really bring out that color in his hair. Then the last thing, as always, on a bust is I like to paint the sides just a complete black. And so this is just regular black from Apple Barrel. I've got this big jug of it I use. And I just like to get a nice clean look. And then the podium that it stands on is pretty simple. So I just took some rub and buff and silver and made it look kind of like a brushed steel to kind of, you know, give it something. I'm super happy with how he turned out. It was a really fun paint and not a lot of complex techniques when it came to making this. It was just layering one thing after another. I really hope you've liked this video, and if you're not a subscriber already, please don't forget to hit subscribe and like the video if you've liked what you've seen. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.